The icy Alaskan morning was like no other. The snow-covered wilderness, silent and unforgiving, surrounded Outpost 23, one of the most secure military bases in the region. Soldiers moved about their routines, the air thick with a sense of normalcy, until the impossible happened. A brown bear, massive and imposing, tore through the base's high-security perimeter. The alarms wailed, and armed soldiers rushed to confront the intruder, weapons drawn and adrenaline surging. But what the bear did next left everyone frozen in shock. It stopped abruptly, lowering its massive head in an unmistakable gesture of submission. This wasn't an act of aggression, it was a plea. A sound followed, soft, almost mournful, like a cry for help. Lieutenant Scott Parker, a seasoned military leader with over 15 years of experience, arrived at the scene. His eyes narrowed as he surveyed the situation. The bear's behavior defied everything he had ever known about wild animals. Bears were territorial and unpredictable, especially when near humans. But this one wasn't attacking. It was waiting, as though expecting their help. The base's wildlife expert, Sergeant James Miller, pointed out a critical detail. The bear was a nursing mother. Her fur, matted with ice and snow, and her labored breathing told a story of exhaustion. Whatever had driven her to this desperate act had to be urgent. The situation quickly escalated. Surveillance footage revealed something astonishing. The bear had been observing the base for hours the previous night, waiting for the perfect moment to make her entry. Her movements were deliberate and calculated, as though she understood the risks and chose to take them anyway. Lieutenant Parker stood silently, grappling with a decision that would test every protocol he had ever followed. This wasn't just a wild animal intruding on their territory. It was a mother seeking help. His gut told him there was more to this story, a reason that would shake the hardened soldiers to their core. But was he ready to break protocol for the unknown? The frigid air was thick with tension as Lieutenant Parker deliberated his next move. Military protocol was clear. Neutralize any breach of security, especially when it involved a potential threat. But this wasn't just any breach. The bear's submissive behavior, her deliberate approach, and those haunting, pleading sounds, none of it fit the pattern of a wild animal acting out of desperation or hunger. Something was driving her to seek human help, and Parker knew he couldn't ignore it. Sergeant Miller broke the silence, his voice calm but urgent. "Sir, this is no ordinary bear. She's a nursing mother and her actions are deliberate. If she's coming to us, she's out of options. There's something she needs us to see." The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. They were trained to deal with hostile intruders, unpredictable weather, and even the occasional wild animal wandering too close. But this was something entirely different. The bear wasn't just seeking food or shelter, she was asking for help. And it wasn't just her presence that was strange. The surveillance footage from the previous night revealed her calculated movements, as if she had studied the base and waited for the right moment to approach. "She's been circling the perimeter for hours," Miller added, pointing to the screen. "Her tracks show she's traveled a great distance through some of the harshest terrain in the region. Whatever drove her here must be critical." Parker's mind raced. If the bear was a mother, where were her cubs? The thought hit him like a blow to the chest. Could they be in danger? The pieces began to fall into place. A mother bear wouldn't abandon her cubs unless something was terribly wrong, and the urgency in her behavior suggested time was running out. "Lieutenant," Miller continued, "her physical state is deteriorating. She's exhausted and distressed. If we don't act soon, whatever she's trying to show us might be lost." Parker's gut told him Miller was right, but the weight of his responsibilities bore down on him. Leaving the base for an unsanctioned mission was a violation of protocol, and leading his team into the unknown came with significant risks. Yet as he looked at the bear, who was now pacing back and forth near the tree line, glancing back at them with desperate eyes, he knew this wasn't a situation that could be resolved by following the rulebook. The decision wasn't easy, but Parker was no stranger to difficult choices. He turned to his men, his voice firm and resolute. "We're going to investigate. Miller, you're with me. Corporal Hayes, gather a small team and prep for an emergency field mission. Make sure we're equipped for the worst." As the soldiers moved to prepare, the bear's behavior shifted. She stopped pacing and let out a series of low, guttural huffs, her eyes fixed on Parker. It was almost as if she understood their decision and was urging them to follow quickly. The base's perimeter cameras captured every moment, documenting what would later be described as one of the most extraordinary displays of animal intelligence ever witnessed. By the time the team was ready, the bear was standing near the edge of the forest, her massive frame silhouetted against the snow-covered landscape. She glanced back one more time before taking a few cautious steps forward, then paused, waiting for the soldiers to follow. The urgency in her movements was palpable, and the soldiers couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing against the clock. The team consisted of Parker, Miller, and 3 other experienced soldiers. They carried medical supplies, survival gear, and ropes prepared for the unknown challenges that lay ahead. Before leaving, Parker radioed the base to establish a strict communication schedule. If they encountered any danger or failed to check in, backup would be deployed immediately. As they followed the bear into the dense forest, the harsh reality of their mission began to sink in. The terrain was treacherous, with thick snowdrifts and ice-covered paths that made every step a challenge. The storm clouds overhead threatened to bring even harsher conditions, and the rapidly fading daylight reminded them that Alaska's winter was unforgiving. But what struck the team the most was the bear herself. She moved with purpose, her powerful body cutting through the snow with ease. Occasionally, she would stop and look back, ensuring they were still following. Her behavior was unlike anything they had ever seen. This wasn't a mindless animal driven by instinct. It was a mother on a mission, and the soldiers were her only hope. The deeper they ventured into the wilderness, the more Parker's resolve hardened. Whatever lay ahead, he knew they couldn't turn back now. The bear had risked everything to lead them here, and they owed it to her to see this mission through. As they pressed on, a sense of unease settled over the group. The forest was eerily silent, the usual sounds of wildlife replaced by the soft crunch of snow beneath their boots and the bear's heavy breathing. It was as if the wilderness itself was holding its breath, waiting to reveal the secrets it had kept hidden. What were they about to uncover? The thought lingered in Parker's mind as they trudged forward, the bear leading them deeper into the unknown. The forest grew denser as the team followed the mother bear, her urgency driving them further into the unknown. Snowflakes began to fall, lightly at first, then thick and heavy, coating the already treacherous terrain. Lieutenant Parker signaled his team to spread out slightly, keeping their eyes on the bear while staying vigilant for any potential threats. The Alaskan wilderness wasn't just cold and unforgiving. It was dangerous in ways that even seasoned soldiers couldn't predict. The bear's behavior shifted as they approached a narrow clearing. She stopped abruptly, her massive frame stiffening, and let out a deep, guttural sound that echoed through the forest. It wasn't a warning, it was grief. The sound sent chills through the soldiers, more chilling than the biting cold wind against their faces. "Something's here," Parker said, his voice low but commanding. "Stay alert." The soldiers tightened their grips on their gear as the bear led them to a spot that seemed ordinary at first glance, a patch of snow surrounded by towering pines. But as they drew closer, the ground beneath them dipped into a small depression. There, concealed by layers of freshly fallen snow, was the jagged opening of an old mining shaft. Sergeant Miller was the first to speak. "Sir, this isn't just any hole. That's a mining shaft, probably abandoned decades ago." Parker crouched near the edge of the opening, brushing away the snow with a gloved hand. His heart sank as he peered inside. The narrow shaft descended at least 15 feet into the frozen ground. The walls were slick with ice, and the remnants of rotted wooden supports hinted at its age. At the bottom, barely visible, were 2 tiny bear cubs huddled together. "Dear God," Corporal Hayes murmured, peering over Parker's shoulder. "How long have they been down there?" The mother bear let out another mournful sound, pacing near the shaft's edge, but careful not to get too close. Her tracks in the snow showed the full extent of her desperation. The ground was torn up where she had tried to dig her way to her cubs. Nearby, broken branches lay scattered, evidence of her attempts to lower something into the pit for them to climb. She had done everything she could, and when nothing worked, she turned to the only creatures that might help. "They've been down there for days, maybe longer," Miller said, his voice tight with urgency. "If we don't get them out soon, they won't survive." Parker's jaw tightened. The cubs were barely moving, their fragile bodies struggling against the deadly cold. The smaller one appeared almost lifeless, its faint whimpers barely audible. Time was running out, and they all knew it. "Set up a perimeter," Parker ordered. "Miller, assess the shaft. Hayes, get the emergency blankets and heating packs ready. We're going to need everything we've got." The soldiers moved quickly, their training taking over as they prepared for the rescue. Parker radioed the base, requesting additional supplies, including more ropes, a portable heating system, and a medevac team on standby. But he knew reinforcements might not arrive in time. The cubs couldn't wait. The mother bear paced back and forth, her powerful frame a mix of tension and exhaustion. She kept her distance but never took her eyes off the soldiers. Despite her obvious distress, she showed no aggression, as if she understood that these humans were her last hope. Miller examined the shaft, his headlamp illuminating the grim scene below. "The walls are unstable," he said. "We can't send heavy equipment down. It'll collapse the whole thing. We'll have to rely on ropes and harnesses." Parker nodded. "Then we do it by hand. Let's move." The first step was securing the area around the shaft. The soldiers cleared away loose snow and debris, creating a stable workspace. They set up a sturdy anchor point for the rescue ropes, ensuring every knot and clip was secure. One mistake could send a rescuer plummeting into the pit or, worse, cause the entire structure to cave in. The mother bear sat just a few feet away now, watching their every move. Her breath formed clouds in the icy air, and her massive paws rested in the snow, trembling slightly. She seemed to understand the fragility of the moment, her usually fierce instincts subdued by the urgency of saving her cubs. The first harness was lowered into the shaft, aimed at the larger cub, which showed more signs of life. The team worked with steady hands, their breaths fogging up their visors as they maneuvered the makeshift cradle toward the young bear. It took agonizing minutes, each second stretched thin by the weight of what was at stake. The mother bear let out a soft sound, almost like encouragement, as the cub cautiously moved toward the harness. Whether it was instinct, trust in the humans, or desperation, the young bear eventually stepped into the cradle. The soldiers seized the moment, securing the cub and beginning the slow, careful ascent. Every inch upward was a battle. The cold had stiffened the ropes, and the icy walls of the shaft threatened to snag the harness. The cub, frightened by the movement, began to struggle, its small cries echoing up the shaft. The mother bear responded with soft huffs, her sounds calming the cub enough for the soldiers to continue. Halfway up, disaster nearly struck. A chunk of the shaft wall crumbled, sending debris tumbling toward the second cub below. Parker barked orders, keeping the team focused and steady. "No sudden movements. Keep it slow and controlled." The tension was unbearable, but after what felt like hours, the first cub emerged from the shaft. The mother bear approached cautiously, her massive paws pressing into the snow as she sniffed her baby. The cub let out a small cry, and the bear nuzzled it gently before looking back toward the shaft. Her message was clear. There was still one more life to save. Parker glanced at Miller. "We're going back down." The team quickly regrouped, their breath visible in the freezing air as they prepared for the second, even riskier descent. The first cub was now safe, wrapped in thermal blankets and lying close to the portable heater the soldiers had set up. But the second cub's condition was far worse, and the shaft had grown increasingly unstable after the initial rescue. Every second counted. Lieutenant Parker didn't waste time. "Miller, you're going in," he said firmly. "You've got the wildlife expertise, and you know how to handle the cub. But this time, we'll need extra precautions. We're not losing anyone down there." The team modified the rescue setup, reinforcing the ropes and adding an additional safety line to account for the shaft's deteriorating state. Miller stepped forward without hesitation, his face calm but determined. He strapped on his gear and adjusted his headlamp, the beam cutting through the darkness of the shaft below. "Don't worry, little one," Miller muttered as he tested the tension on his line. "We're getting you out of there." The mother bear's reaction was extraordinary. She paced near the edge of the shaft but stopped short, as if sensing the delicate nature of what was about to happen. Her soft huffs and mournful sounds were now replaced by a tense silence, her massive body still except for the small puffs of breath that escaped her nose. As Miller descended into the shaft, the team above monitored every movement with bated breath. The narrow walls crumbled slightly with each shift, sending loose debris raining down. The further Miller went, the more the temperature dropped, the icy air biting through his protective gear. He could see the second cub now, partially buried in snow and dirt, its tiny body almost motionless. "The cub's alive," Miller called up, his voice echoing off the shaft walls. "But barely. We've got to work fast." Reaching the cub proved to be only the first challenge. The small bear was weak, its breathing shallow and irregular. Miller carefully cleared away the debris around its body, his gloved hands moving with the precision of a surgeon. Each movement sent more loose earth tumbling down, threatening to bury both him and the cub. Above ground, Parker barked orders to his team, ensuring the ropes remained taut and the safety line secure. "Stay sharp," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "We don't have room for mistakes." Miller finally freed the cub and wrapped it in an emergency thermal blanket, cradling it close to his chest to share body heat. But now came the most perilous part, the ascent. The walls of the shaft groaned under the strain of the shifting earth, and the ropes were stiff with ice. Every second felt like an eternity. "Start pulling," Parker commanded, his voice steady but firm. The soldiers began the slow, careful process of lifting Miller and the cub out of the shaft. The mother bear moved closer, her dark eyes fixed on the movement below, her massive frame radiating both tension and trust. Halfway up, disaster struck. A large section of the shaft wall gave way, sending a cascade of frozen earth and debris tumbling toward Miller and the cub. The soldiers above scrambled to adjust the ropes, their hands burning against the icy lines. Miller curled his body protectively around the cub, shielding it from the falling debris as the team worked frantically to pull them up. "Hold the line!" Parker shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Don't let go!" The mother bear let out a low guttural sound, pacing in tight circles near the edge of the shaft. Her instincts screamed at her to intervene, but somehow she held back, her massive paws pressing into the snow as she waited, desperate but trusting. The final moments of the ascent were a blur of panic and precision. The shaft groaned ominously, the sound of cracking timber and shifting earth growing louder with each second. The soldiers pulled with everything they had, their muscles straining as they fought against the collapsing structure. With a final heave, Miller emerged from the shaft. The cub clutched tightly in his arms. The team pulled them clear just as the shaft gave way completely, collapsing into a cloud of dust and snow that obscured everything for several heart-stopping seconds. When the dust settled, the scene was one of exhaustion and relief. Miller lay on the ground, gasping for breath, the small cub still bundled in his arms. The mother bear approached cautiously, her massive form casting a shadow over the soldiers as she sniffed her baby. The cub let out a weak cry, and the bear nuzzled it gently, her soft huffs now filled with relief. "She's okay," Miller said hoarsely, his voice thick with emotion. "We did it." The mother bear stepped back, her gaze shifting between her rescued cubs and the humans who had saved them. Her dark eyes lingered on Parker for a long moment, a silent acknowledgement of what had just transpired. But the mission wasn't over yet. The second cub's condition was critical, and the team quickly set up an emergency treatment area. Using portable heaters, thermal blankets, and even their own body heat, they worked tirelessly to stabilize the tiny bear. The mother bear watched every movement, her trust in these humans defying everything they thought they knew about wild animals. The hours that followed were a battle against time and the elements. The soldiers worked in shifts, their training and discipline keeping them focused despite the overwhelming exhaustion. The mother bear remained close, her presence both a source of tension and an unspoken bond. As dawn broke over the Alaskan wilderness, the second cub began to stir, its small movements sparking hope in the exhausted team. The mother bear let out a soft, almost joyful sound, her relief palpable. They had done it. Against all odds, they had saved the cubs. But the story wasn't over yet. The bond between these humans and this extraordinary mother bear was about to deepen in ways none of them could have imagined. As the first light of dawn spread across the snow-covered wilderness, the rescue team stood together, weary but relieved. Both bear cubs had shown signs of recovery, though the smaller one remained fragile. The mother bear, ever watchful, stayed near her babies, her massive form casting a protective shadow over them. Lieutenant Parker wiped his face, exhaustion etched into his features. He looked at the team and said, "Good work, everyone. But we're not done yet. These cubs are stable, but they need more care to survive. And we need to figure out how to reunite this family safely." The next few hours were spent stabilizing their makeshift camp. The portable heaters hummed as they created a warm space for the cubs to rest. The mother bear sat just a few feet away, her amber eyes tracking every movement. Her trust was evident, but her anxiety for her cubs was unmistakable. Every small cry from the cubs brought her closer, her soft huffs serving as both a comfort to her babies and a reminder to the humans of her presence. Sergeant Miller knelt beside the cubs, his gloved hand gently adjusting the thermal blankets. "They're fighters," he murmured, "especially this little one." He glanced at the smaller cub, whose breathing had grown steadier. "But we've got to keep them warm and hydrated if they're going to make it." The mother bear's behavior continued to astonish the team. She accepted food and water from the soldiers, her massive paws delicately pawing at the snow as if to express gratitude. But she never let her guard down entirely, her attention constantly shifting between the humans and her cubs. "This isn't normal," Miller said to Parker during a brief moment of quiet. "Wild bears don't act like this. She knows we're helping her, but she's still a mother. One wrong move and—" Parker nodded. "We'll keep earning her trust. It's the only way we get through this." As the day wore on, the mother bear's remarkable intelligence became even more apparent. When the soldiers needed space to adjust the cubs' blankets or administer water, she stepped back, her eyes fixed on the humans. When the cubs grew restless, she moved closer, her presence calming them in ways the humans couldn't replicate. Her actions weren't just instinctive, they seemed deliberate, as if she understood the stakes. By the second night, the team had established a routine. They worked in shifts, ensuring the cubs received constant care. The portable heaters kept the frigid air at bay, and the soldiers took turns resting under emergency blankets. The mother bear remained a constant presence, her massive form silhouetted against the dim light of the camp. But the wilderness was unforgiving, and the team faced new challenges as temperatures plummeted further. The cubs' recovery was slow, and the soldiers' supplies were running low. Parker made the difficult decision to call for reinforcements, requesting additional medical supplies and food from the base. "We can't leave until those cubs are strong enough to follow their mother," Parker told his team, "but we're pushing the limits out here. Reinforcements will buy us time." The base responded quickly, dispatching a small supply team to deliver the requested items. The soldiers worked tirelessly, their military training allowing them to adapt to the unprecedented situation, but even the toughest among them couldn't ignore the emotional weight of their mission. Watching the mother bear care for her cubs, despite her own exhaustion, stirred something in all of them. "It's humbling," one soldier said quietly as he watched the bear nuzzle her cubs. "She came to us for help, and now she's trusting us with her family. It's not what I expected out here." The bond between the mother bear and the soldiers grew stronger with each passing hour. Her trust wasn't blind. She watched every move they made, but it was clear she understood their intentions. When the cubs showed signs of improvement, she responded with visible relief, her body relaxing as she lay beside them. On the third day, the smaller cub began to show real signs of recovery. It opened its eyes and let out a small, tentative cry. The mother bear's reaction was immediate. She moved closer, gently nuzzling the cub with her nose. The soldiers watched in awe as the cub responded, wriggling weakly but unmistakably alive. "We did it," Miller said, his voice thick with emotion. "They're going to make it." The team's exhaustion was overshadowed by a sense of triumph. Against all odds, they had saved the cubs. But now came the hardest part, letting the bears go. The mother bear, sensing her cubs' newfound strength, began to prepare for their departure. She rose to her full height, towering over the soldiers, before letting out a low, rumbling sound. It wasn't a threat, it was a declaration. Her family was ready to move on. Lieutenant Parker gave the order to clear the camp. The soldiers carefully packed up their gear, their movements slow and deliberate to avoid startling the bear. The mother bear stood nearby, her eyes following every motion. Finally, the moment came. The mother bear nudged her cubs, encouraging them to stand. The smaller cub wobbled unsteadily, but with its mother's gentle prodding, it managed to take its first steps. The larger cub followed, its movements more confident, but no less reliant on its mother's guidance. As the bears began to move toward the tree line, the mother bear paused. She turned back, her amber eyes locking onto Parker. For a long moment, she simply stood there, the snow swirling around her massive form. Then with a soft huff, she turned and led her cubs into the wilderness. The soldiers watched in silence as the bears disappeared among the trees. None of them spoke, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. Parker finally broke the silence, his voice low but resolute. "We did good here. Let's get home." The mission was over, but its impact would last far beyond that frozen wilderness. The bond formed between those soldiers and a desperate mother bear was a testament to the power of trust, courage, and compassion. The rescue mission at Outpost 23 became the stuff of legend, not just within the military but also among wildlife experts and conservationists. For the soldiers who lived through it, the memory of that desperate mother bear and her unwavering trust would stay with them forever. But as they returned to their base, the work was far from over. Lieutenant Parker led his team back with a renewed sense of purpose. The mission had been about more than protocol or survival. It had been about doing what was right, even in the face of unimaginable challenges. As the team gathered in the base's debriefing room, the weight of what they had achieved settled over them. "Let's get everything documented," Parker said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion that lined his face. "Not just the rescue, but everything we've learned from this. We owe it to them and to ourselves to make sure it wasn't for nothing." The soldiers worked together to compile their reports, detailing every moment of the mission. From the bear's extraordinary decision to seek help to the tense and dangerous rescue, each detail was meticulously recorded. The footage from the base's security cameras, along with thermal imaging and photos taken during the operation, became vital evidence of the bond that had formed between humans and a wild predator. Word of the incident spread quickly. Within days, higher-ups in the military command were reviewing the case, and soon after, wildlife experts from across the country reached out to the base. The story of the mother bear's trust and the soldiers' willingness to risk their lives to save her cubs captured the imagination of people everywhere. Back at the base, changes were already being made. The command ordered a comprehensive survey of the region, focusing on identifying and securing abandoned mining shafts and other hidden dangers in the wilderness. Teams were dispatched to map out these sites, ensuring that no other animals or humans would suffer the same fate as those bear cubs. Outpost 23 also revised its protocols for wildlife encounters. Where once the standard procedure had been to neutralize any potential threat, the new guidelines emphasized observation and assessment. Lieutenant Parker and Sergeant Miller played key roles in drafting these changes, using their experience with the mother bear as a blueprint for how to handle future incidents. "This wasn't just about saving two cubs," Parker explained during a briefing with visiting officers. "It was about recognizing the intelligence and agency of a wild animal. She didn't just stumble onto our base, she made a choice, and that's something we need to respect." For Sergeant Miller, the experience had a deeply personal impact. An avid wildlife enthusiast, even before the mission, he now found himself even more dedicated to understanding the natural world. In his downtime, he began studying animal behavior, diving into research on bear intelligence and maternal instincts. He even reached out to conservation groups, hoping to share what he had learned. "I've seen a lot in my time here," he said to a group of soldiers one evening, "but that bear showed me something I never expected. That trust can cross boundaries we don't fully understand, and that's something worth protecting." Months passed and the memory of the mission began to settle into the fabric of life at the base. But for the soldiers who had been there, the impact was lasting. Every time they looked out at the wilderness surrounding the base, they were reminded of the bond they had shared with a creature most people would have feared. Occasionally, soldiers on patrol would spot a large female bear with two healthy cubs moving through the trees in the distance. While they couldn't be certain it was the same family, the bear's behavior suggested otherwise. They never showed aggression or fear, instead moving calmly past the soldiers, as if carrying an unspoken understanding. The story of the mission at Outpost 23 became a symbol of courage and compassion. It was shared in military briefings, conservation conferences, and even local news segments. The footage of the mother bear bowing her head in submission at the base's gate became an iconic image, a reminder of the extraordinary bond that had formed between humans and the wild. Years later, Lieutenant Parker, now retired, reflected on that day in a rare interview. "I've faced a lot of challenges in my career," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But that mission was different. It wasn't about tactics or orders. It was about trust, hers in us and ours in her. And that's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life." The legacy of that mission extended beyond the base and its personnel. Conservation efforts in the region were strengthened, abandoned sites were secured, and new guidelines were implemented for handling wildlife encounters. The story became a testament to what's possible when humans and animals meet with mutual respect and understanding. And somewhere in the vast Alaskan wilderness, a mother bear and her cubs thrived, their bond stronger than ever, a living reminder of the courage it took to seek help and the humanity it took to answer that call.